before we get even started on this, I just want to thank you all for coming out, and I want to thank Film Streams. I want to thank the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and I also want to thank two special people that are in California right now. Kishore Hari, who was one of the founders of the Bay Area Science Festival. He's worked with Adam Savage at Tested.com, and he's worked on some Lucasfilm projects. And Jeffrey Silverman, he is an astrophysicist. They are from Big Screen Science, and they helped with some of the more technical science that you will hear about tonight. But as Diana said, I'm Kacie Baum, Senior Manager of Events and Community Relations at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. I'm the coordinator of the Omaha Science Cafes and the Nebraska Science Festival. And joining me tonight is Kristina.
Hi everyone, my name is Kristina Pravoverov, and I'm an MD PhD student at UNMC, as you've heard, in the cancer research program. I'm studying colon cancer.
So, like Diana said, this is kind of our trilogy of holiday science on screens. So we did Home Alone, we did Die Hard, and so we're really excited to bring you tonight Gremlins. We were going to bring it to you last year, but COVID kind of dampened that on us. So, fun fact about Gremlins, this was one of the movies that led to the creation of the PG-13 rating. Plus, it also seems like The Simpsons were also big fans of the Gremlins. So let's just take a look here before we start.
Do you sell toys?
We sell forbidden objects from places men fear to tread. We also sell frozen yogurt, which I call Frogut.
Well, I need something for my son's birthday.
Perhaps this will please the gentleman. Take this object, but beware, it carries a terrible curse.
Ooh, that's bad.
But it comes with a free Frogut.
That's good.
The Frogut is also cursed.
That's bad.
But you get your choice of topping.
That's good.
The toppings contain potassium benzoate. That's bad.
Can I go now?
So, we're going to start off by talking a little bit of history about gremlins. So, some people derive the name gremlin from the Old English word gremian, which means to vex. But the term really came into use in the 1920s by Royal Air Force pilots, as seen up here. They used the word gremlin to denote a mischievous creature that sabotaged military equipment, specifically aircrafts. And the term became really popular during World War II when this book came out, which was used as a safety guide in war propaganda for children. The book was published in 1943 and written by a British flying ace that had never produced a children's book before. Some of you might recognize him, a Mr. Roald Dahl. It was commissioned by this guy, Walt Disney, to be used as, again, promotional device for a feature-length animated film about gremlins and the war effort. But the war ended, the movie was scrapped, and though, spoiler, here it comes, in our movie tonight, the gremlins, of course, go see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was the first full-length animated feature produced by Disney Film. Beyond just Doll and Disney, the idea of evil little gremlins can be found in many places in pulp culture.
I mean, there was a classic Twilight Zone episode on it. I think it was called, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, where pre-Captain Kirk, Will Shatner is the only person on a plane to see a gremlin on the wing, destroying the plane while it was in midair. And then this was remade for the Twilight Zone movie in 1983, though, with John Lithgow playing William Shatner's character.
And then, once again, The Simpsons. They did it again with a parody in 1993 called Terror at 5.5 Feet, where Bart sees a gremlin tearing apart the school bus, and then again, famously parodied in the classic 1995 film Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls.
So let's talk about the biology of these weird creatures, the mogwai. So their life cycle apparently starts by adding a little bit of water to the juvenile mogwai, and then they asexually bud to reproduce. And then when they eat after midnight, they form cocoons, which then hatch into gremlins, which when they get wet, they asexually reproduce to make more Gremlins.
So complicated, yes, but not necessarily unrealistic. Feel we have a good crowd here, maybe a very good, some asexual energy tonight in this crowd. So we're going to start with the idea of budding.
So budding is a pretty common form of asexual reproduction, one of several types. And so typically in high resource times or environments when food is plentiful, you could see things like coral, flatworms, or these small tentacled creatures called hydra basically these hydra can form bumps on their body that then pinch off, and then they go along their merry way and form new hydra. And then this whole process takes about 3 days, not like the, 30 seconds you see in the movie?
Yeah.
But that's not bad. But coming back to their life cycle, so mogwai then are the larval form of gremlins. So we essentially have an immature child asexually reproducing on its own, which is a little weird, because even hydra or coral, they reproduce asexually in their more mature stages. But there are a few that do it as larvae, such as everyone's favorite, the axolotl.
Yeah, so the most famous salamander on the internet. But unlike most salamanders, they don't forego metamorphosis to reach adulthood. They keep these hairy gill-like features and a juvenile-like experience. Or, as one scientist referred to it in a paper, and this is legit, a derpy face. This is largely due to a thyroid-stimulating hormone. So if you give them a dose of iodine to stimulate their thyroid, they start metamorphosis. These creatures are a favorite of scientists because they also have the weird ability to regenerate themselves, mostly limbs, but there was one weird case where they repaired damage to a small part of their brain.
Back to the life cycle. We've gotten through the initial budding stage, and we've also learned that axolotls are like the OG mogwai, apparently, which then brings us to the eating after midnight thing.
Okay, so we're told, again, spoiler, another rule of mogwai ownership is never feed them after midnight, which is probably the most vague of the rules. Like, that's just really vague. First off, what time can we start feeding him again? Because every point in time is after the previous midnight. Second, which midnight are they referring to? What time zone are we talking about? And do we need to take daylight saving time into account? And yes, I did say daylight saving time because it is singular. Clearly, it doesn't matter what a clock says because the evil mogwai cut the electricity to the clock, and that makes sense as a clock is a simple human construct to track the abstract idea of time, but I digress. Anyway, it seems that midnight in this context must be based on something more physical than just what a nearby clock says.
So, what is midnight anyway? It's traditionally defined as, the halfway point between sunset and sunrise, which is also known as solar midnight. But a bit more rigorous definition of this is when the sun is closest to its nadir, or the direction that is directly below your location. This is the opposite of the zenith, in which it's pointing directly above your location.
So when the sun is closest to the zenith, which is the same as when the sun appears highest in the sky, we call it solar noon, also known as high noon. If you're a Western fanatic here, you might have heard that before. And notice I didn't say when the sun is directly overhead is solar moon or directly below is solar midnight, because the sun in certain places is never directly overhead for people. Due to the fact that the earth is a sphere and not flat, I will repeat that. Due to the fact that the earth is a sphere and not flat, the sun appears directly overhead only during certain times of the year and only in places near the equator and the tropics. But it is never directly overhead for places north or south of the tropics. So, given all this, perhaps the mogwai rule should actually be, and this is a big one, are you ready? Never feed him during the time just after solar midnight at his current location, though it's still unclear to me for how long after solar midnight we're not supposed to feed them.
Yeah. But for now, let's stick with that sort of vague but less vague definition than before, that rule about not eating after midnight, and talk about what solar midnight actually has to do with mogwai eating. So a mogwai's body is probably knows that it's solar midnight because of its circadian rhythm, which is approximately a 24-hour cycle in which it's present in most organisms on Earth, which regulates our sleep, our wakefulness cycles, the way our brain works, and how our hormones are produced. And so animals like the urban European hedgehog and the Brazilian big-eyed bat over there, they both engage in post-midnight feeding activity, all thanks to the programming of their own circadian rhythms. So for mogwai's circadian rhythms, they probably trigger hormonal functions responsible for turning them into the evil, non-furry gremlins. And so during this time, they're essentially primed for the transformation, and all they need is fuel in the form of food to trigger that change. So now we're kind of in the xenomorph arena, because it's time to talk about cocoons and gremlins. So gremlin science is pretty basic. Basically, it's the same as a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. The gremlin molts, or rather the mogwai molts, shedding its skin and hair, and it forms a cocoon around itself, or a chrysalis. And then once that chrysalis forms, a bunch of enzymes that are triggered by the circadian rhythm that we heard about earlier then break down all the mogwai cells, reverting them to a non-specialized or non-differentiated cell called an imaginal cell, which are basically like stem cells. And we know that stem cells can split and form into any other part of, any other type of cell, which can form any other type of a body, depending on its programming. And so from these 3D scans here, you can see that the insides are essentially taken back to the studs and then rebuilt from the ground up. That's why you get an almost entirely different looking organism, except for the overall volume.
Finally, we're just going to take a quick break from the science reel here and just look at this beautiful picture, which is a still from the movie. The crazy thing is, as we're going to see in the movie, is that gremlins can reproduce asexually via water catalyst as well. And again, this is just a fun little, let's take a deep breath. This is a lot of information. Let's have a good smile and a good laugh. And now let's get back to the science.
So this life cycle suggests that if a gremlin and another gremlin were to get it on sexually, they would, in theory, produce a mogwai. Mogwai could reproduce asexually until there was enough food, and then they'd undergo the metamorphosis to become gremlins once they're fed after midnight.
But here's the thing. The gremlins hate their kids so much that they evolved a separate mechanism to eliminate them from their life cycle. So even nature is just like, no, it's not good. So where do we think mogwai come from? Kristina?
So my theory is that they're kind of like an invasive species, maybe from a desert area like the Sahara, or even better, Antarctica. Because if you think about it this way, they don't like the sunlight, and when they eat, they reproduce, right? And I mean, a desert has a lack of humidity and precipitation, but in Antarctica, it's only daylight 6 months out of the year. And then the other 6 months, bam, it's completely dark, and then the gremlins can come out to play, and then, eat and reproduce and all that fun stuff.
So I'm going to challenge this and say that they're not even from Earth, that they are from outer space. They're extraterrestrials with weird life cycles and green blood, which you will see in the film. But I'm really also not really sold on that. But we can all agree that gremlins aren't the villains here. They just are trying to eat. They're trying to drink. They're trying to reproduce. That means there is one person to blame for all of this that we are going to watch tonight, and it is this kid right here. Yep, and he is also a Yankees fan, so let's give it a big boo right here, right?
So, what have we learned?
So, we have learned that daylight saving time is basically pointless. We have learned that mogwai have a finely tuned circadian rhythm and that they're genderless, or at least they reproduce asexually, but most present as male. And finally, our third point, which we didn't even talk about, which you will notice in the next hour and 50-some minutes, is that Judge Reinhold is kind of always a douche in everything he does tonight. And with evaluating our science and what we learned, we give this movie, ready? 3 gremlin blenders of appropriate science. So we just want to say thank you so much for coming out. Thank you to Film Streams. Thank you to Kristina. Thank you to Kishore and Jeffrey, UNMC, letting us present our fun little science presentation. And now I hope all of you enjoy Gremlins for the 20th time or the first time. So thank you so much. That is what we have tonight.